our blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah Hafok ba, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Yedadai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yedadai-dai-dai-dai. So it's so good to be with all of you. Hi, Rabbi Catherine. Hi, Frank. Hi, Brian. Good to see you all. We're going to start with the book of Devarim. And I know I've missed you over the past couple of weeks, but I'm so glad that we can be here together starting this book. So, can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So we're going to be focused on the midah, or soul trait of strength. And essentially, Givorah, it has a lot of translations. Very often we know that languages aren't, you can't completely translate it exactly the same from one language to another. There's always little differences, often culturally, right? And the word Givorah means a whole lot more than strength. So it can be translated as strength, discipline, discernment, or perseverance, which are all very different things in English, but in Hebrew, they kind of fall under this category of Givorah. So I want us to just kind of think through what Givorah might look like if it's out of check, and also what Givorah might look like if it really is being used in a healthy way. Anyone have any ideas about that? If we have too much discipline, too much discernment and perseverance, what might that look like?
In some ways, it could look like holding us back from being creative. If you have to follow a discipline, it may restrict you from the freedom. It may restrict you from creativity. May restrict you from exploring. Discipline may have a role, like when you're a child to a parent. Generally in society, especially religion, disciplines can hold you back from free thinking.
Okay, so that's one really good example. Rabbi Catherine, were you about to say something as well?
What it always reminds me of is my way or the highway. It's like, we're in this place, it's my way or the highway, no matter whether it's a family, it's an organization, it's whatever. And to me, that's very claustrophobic.
Yeah, so it's interesting that in different ways, you and Larry both kind of explained the same moment, right? If we have too much discipline, it can kind of box us in and stop us from exploring something bigger.
Right.
On the other hand, it's a practice to make you, if you want to change a piece in your life, generally you have to do the same thing over and over and over to do it at different levels. But you have to decide that, 8 o'clock in the morning is going to be whatever.
Yeah, so maybe moving to the second question, right? Having some discipline in order can give our lives some structure. What else can healthy Givorah look like?
So as a hockey coach for a long time, we have to teach our players at a young age the discipline of not retaliating, because the retaliation always gets caught, right? So a guy cross-checks you, hits you with a stick, whatever it might be, that your job is to stay disciplined, because if you get the penalty on you, then your team goes down a player, and now you're putting your team at risk because you couldn't control your emotions, and you have to stay disciplined in those type of things. And it's very widely taught in the sports, is not to retaliate, because retaliation always gets caught. So there's a good discipline in that.
Frank, if you don't retaliate, they'll keep on picking on you and blocking you. You'll be considered.
No, we have other players to help you out with that.
Oh, other players.
Teammate jump.
Oh, so you have
Your
other
teammates
police-
jump.
yeah. That's right. So you shouldn't do it. Someone else should do it. So retaliation. Retaliation.
Not, and you don't retaliate. No, you just play rougher against you play rougher against the players who do things to your teammates, and
Right.
you make sure you put a good hit on them, where so there's ways of handling without getting penalties and staying disciplined in the game between the whistles. If that makes sense to people.
That's because you
Yeah.
have-
So Larry, you were just bringing up the point, like, isn't too much discipline a bad thing here, right? Like,
Right,
because you can get out of check in two different directions.
right.
But there's this kind of balance that I think you're describing, Frank, really, of how to have discipline, not too much, not too little, just the right amount to be able to respond appropriately without putting yourself at risk. And
Right.
that can be such a challenging thing to do, both in the game of hockey, I'm getting from what you're saying, Frank, but also in life in so many other aspects. So right now we're just starting this book of the Torah, right? This final book of the Torah, the book of Devarim, in which the entire book is an oration of Moses telling the people their history, and perhaps also telling himself their history, to try to make sense of everything that they had lived through over the past 40 plus years, right? And this commentary that we're exploring today is bringing together the idea of Givorah, of strength, in this way with the book of Devarim. And so the final question that I put here was, why do you think Givorah might be an important midah, an important soul trait to implement as Moses begins his final oration to the Jewish people?
Well, the Israelites are going to have some inner strength if Moses is not going to be there to lead them into the promised land, and they don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so you have to have a lot of Givorah inside you in order to go through and finish the goal, which is to get to the promised land.
Okay, so kind of setting an example for the kind of Givorah they need to employ. Beautiful. Anyone have anything you want to add to that?
Well, reminding them what they've done right as well as wrong. Both things are done in this. And to remind you that you have to work together. Frank saying as a team, you look out for each other. You share the experience, and you look out for the people who are weak. Not just the people who are strong who are going to carry it forward. It's everybody.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's so much there. So let's dive in a little bit. Let's look at some of these first words and keep all of those beautiful comments in mind. So I'm beginning with just the first 3 verses of our parasha. Would anyone like to read these out loud? I know there's some names in there. I can read it if the names are intimidating. That's totally fine. Future ones will not have as many names, so I appreciate that. These are the words that Moses addressed to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan, through the wilderness, in the Arabah, near Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban and Hazerot, and Di Zahab. It is 11 days from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by Mount Seir route. It is it was in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, then Moses addressed the Israelites in accordance with the instructions that God had given for them. So this is just setting up the stage for everything that's going to follow in this book. And in our commentary in the Musar Torah commentary for today, Rabbi Judy Schenk says, these are the words that Moses addressed to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan. What an understated prelude to the powerful rhetoric that will flow from Moses's lips in his final effort to explain how this all happened to himself and to the Israelites. As his life draws to a close, Moses summons the midah of Givorah, heroic strength, displayed in all its multiple dimensions, to compose and deliver the series of soaring sermons that fill the book of Deuteronomy. So what about sharing his story to the Jewish people requires Moses to demonstrate Givorah, strength? We can just kind of think about that as we move along. That the entire book of Deuteronomy, as we know, it's this long oration filled with Moses's final words to the Jewish people. And as we read some of the early verses in this section, as we're about to, I want us to pay particular attention to the wording, the themes, and the kind of emotions that are expressed, because there is a whole lot that's expressed in just these 7 verses right here, the very first chapter. Does anyone want to read this text? There are not nearly as many names here.
Sure.
Thank you, Jay.
Our God Adonai spoke to us at Horeb, saying, "You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Start out and make your way to the hill country of the Amorites and to all their neighbors in the Arba, the hill country, the Shephelah, the Negev, the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites, and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I place this land at your disposal. Go, take possession of the land that Adonai swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And I'm going to add, "and to your foremothers, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. And to assign to them and to their heirs after them. Therefore, I say to you, I cannot bear the burden of you by myself. Your God Adonai has multiplied you until you are today as numerous as the stars in the sky. May Adonai, the God of your ancestors, increase your number 1,000-fold and bless you as promised. How can I bear the unaided, the trouble of you and the burden and the bickering?"
Okay, so what are some of the themes? Thank you, Jay, so much. And I liked your addition to the verses. Very nice. What are some of the themes and emotions that you're picking up from this text?
Well,
I'm trying
again,
to stump you. Yeah.
again, he is reminding us. I mean, you're looking at what, 40 years worth of history that he is sorting through and deciding what is most important to hand over to these people who have not always been really going along with the program, shall we say. That this is what's going to happen, but I couldn't bear this by myself. How do you think you're going to bear it by yourself? How are you going to do it together as a team, as a single people?
So are you feeling like concern in here? Is that like the emotion that you're getting from it?
I don't know quite how to put it. It's more than concern. He's been a leader set by God. We don't have that coming after him. And there have been a whole lot of problems, and it was very, very difficult. I would be very afraid for the people, I think, on one hand.
Yeah.
This has been a long time with a lot of problems. And you notice it's not focused on any one person. I place the land at your, plural, disposal.
Beautiful. Yes, Sandy, what do you want to say?
What I don't know, I had heard somewhere in some classes I had taken that whenever Adonai is written out, it usually means that it's the God of compassion speaking. And when it's Elohim, it's more the God of din and judgment. So the fact is, I'm thinking, I see Adonai here. So Moses is really relating that this, whatever he's saying, is coming from God, which is the God of compassion here, and wanting the people and really concerned about the people.
So that's such an interesting idea, Sandy. If we look at the Hebrew also, what I'm noticing, right, is that we do have Adonai written here, like in the English translation. If we look at the Hebrew, it's Adonai Eloheinu. And then again, Adonai Elohechem, your God, right? So that is a version of Elohim. It's just with the possessive form. And then it occurs later also, Adonai Elohe. So going by that idea, there seems to actually be a balance that's going on here, which is really interesting. Thank you for bringing that in. Anyone else have any kind of thoughts about some of the themes and things going on in these verses?
What I find interesting is he says, I cannot bear the burden of you by myself. It's almost, it's almost acknowledging that God may be right for picking a new leader. He may be realizing he's not quite up to the job anymore.
So you're reading that as kind of like this bittersweet wording.
Yes. Acknowledging maybe God's doing the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah. How else might you read that verse? Because that's one way of many ways to read that.
Maybe he's acquiescing. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you could also read it as frustration.
Yes.
Right? Like there's so much potential emotion in all of these verses. There's just so much to them. And it's hard for us to know what was going on in Moses's mind at this moment, right?
Absolutely.
Because of all of it. So I want us just to kind of hold on to that. Is there anyone I missed? I can only see a few people at a time, so please jump in if there is. Okay. So I want to bring in a couple of texts. Actually, these two that we're looking at are pretty identical. It's just to show the two different sources. That in Pirkei Avot, we read, who is Gibor, which comes from the same root as Givurah, right? Strength. So Gibor, strong. He who subdues his evil inclination, which is the Yetzer Hara that we've talked about before, right? It is said, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules his spirit than he that takes a city. And similarly, in the Talmud, we have here, who is truly worthy of being called Gibor, mighty? They said to him again, who is a mighty person, the one who masters his desire. So what does that idea of mastering a desire, like how do you make sense of that with the trait of Givurah, of being strong? I mean, I think it goes back a little bit to Frank, what you were talking about before, perhaps, with the hockey team. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, you could look at it as controlling yourself. If you are the leader, if you are the mighty person, you are responsible for many, many, many people. And you might be having a really bad day, or you need to still keep it together. And the mighty person, to master your own desires, think of how many times, I can think of a lot of times when you just kind of lose it and say, no, can't do that now. Cannot do that now.
It takes incredible strength to be able to do that, right? Someone's knocking you around when you're playing hockey. Someone's really not treating you with the respect that you deserve, to be able to respond with that kind of strength and discipline. That's not an easy thing to do. So absolutely. I want us to explore a little more this idea of Yetzer Hara, which is so often translated as evil inclination. I don't particularly love the translation. The reason it's translated that way is because hara means bad, comes from the root ra, which means bad in Hebrew, and yetzer, which is an inclination or something we're created with. So it can refer to one's drive, their personal pursuits for happiness, and prestige being too strong. The Yetzer Hara might lead one to gluttony or overindulgence, move someone to take advantage of others on their way to economic success, or consistently put his own needs before the needs of others. So Yetzer Hara really is like this drive for success of some kind. And when it's out of whack, right, when it becomes too strong, it can lead one to be impulsive. It can lead one to be self-centered. And that's why Yetzer Hara requires discipline, right, to hold us back from that. But in his discourse to the people, do you think that Moses is demonstrating Gevurah as a means of subduing the evil inclination and being slow to anger or mastering his desire? I'm going to bring back up the text that we looked at before these few verses. Do you see evidence within these verses of, sorry, this is being a little finicky. There we go. That Moses is demonstrating Gevurah? Or that he isn't, for that matter.
I think he had the strength and the humility to say to himself in verse 9, I cannot bear the burden of you by myself.
Mm.
And I think it took a lot of strength to be able to say that. It's not easy to say you need help.
Beautiful. Absolutely. It can be such a hard thing to ask for.
This deserve, isn't it something? I mean, he's rallying everybody, but he's rallying them to move on and make war. I mean, to take over the territory of the neighboring communities. So he was being warlike here, in my view. I mean, of course, they were complaining not too long ago that we're stuck here. What are we going to do? So I think he's rallying the people to what's necessary to get to the promised land.
Absolutely. You can go in, you can take over. This is your land. Absolutely, he is.
Kind of goes back and forth. You know, go take possession of the land. I can't bear the burden myself. You're not going to have to. You're going to die. Your God has multiplied you until you are as numerous as the stars in the sky. That could be both good and bad. But the point is that many people there, one of the points is to do the job of moving over the Jordan, of establishing a community, of establishing a way to get along together. You know, may God bless you. May he multiply you. How can I bear unaided the trouble of you? But who is the I? Who is the I? The I who is speaking is giving his last long series of speeches.
Yeah. For a man who said that he was slow of speech, he sure has a lot to say at the end, right?
Makes up for lost time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about these 7 verses is just how much emotion, how much like struggle we see within them. Like, we don't know what's going on in Moses' mind, but we see so many different aspects of himself coming through in the words that are being spoken. We see humility, and I think at some points we might even see a little bit of arrogance. We see, you know, Gevurah being balanced, and sometimes maybe we don't, but it's this really authentic struggle that's going on here as a way of kind of setting an example for the people of how do we struggle with all these various things coming at us and our mortality on top of it. So
That's why.
Within the verses, and I didn't include a lot of this, there's a lot more, where Moses begins to truly reprove the people, to truly say, like, these are the mistakes that you made. And we might wonder, like, why is it that he's bringing these criticisms up at this point of the people, of the ways in which they pushed him? We're going to have a text in which he says, hey, the reason I can't go into the promised land is really because of the things that you did. It's your fault, right? That'll come out in next week's Torah portion. But there are times where he's really hard on the people. And is that appropriate? How does that play out? And so the rabbis had a lot to say about that, unsurprisingly. And Rashi says that Moses spoke as he did, kind of criticizing some of the things the Israelites did, because he knew himself to be near death. For otherwise, a leader ought not to reprove and reprove again and again. So what about being near death makes it okay for him to be kind of criticizing the people in the way that he will throughout this portion? Or do you not agree with Rashi? Yeah.
I think he sees himself as an agent of God, and and translating his, look, you've got all this, gave you all this, and you're multiplied, you're comfortable, and maybe not doing God's wishes right now. And even though the promise is there, is that we got to get that, we got to get there. So I think he's trying to be in his mind, the voice between God and the community.
Yeah, so saying some things that previously might have been unsaid.
Yeah.
A leader shouldn't berate the people all the time, but it says he knew himself to be near death. So when else would he do it? He couldn't do it after he died. He needed to say what was on his mind and in his heart at that time.
What's the purpose of that? How does that help him saying what's on his mind and his heart?
Well, he could be a little angry himself that he's not getting to go, blaming moving the blame to somebody else.
Well, it's also sincerity. I mean, it's coming from him to them.
Yeah, so there's different ways of viewing it. Yeah, Michael, did you want to say something else?
No, I don't know if you hear me, but I say, for me, it's sincerity and the humility of his own life that he needed to say this and get it out because it says he knew himself to be near death.
Yeah. So, I mean, is the idea there that to give people an opportunity to reflect on what had happened so as to be able to learn from past mistakes? Jay's nodding along. Do you want to say something about that, Jay?
It just makes a lot of sense to me. To me, the idea in Deuteronomy is we get to see Moses go through the steps of grief and knowing that he's going to die. And at the beginning, Moses still has some feelings of like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. So what am I going to do? Oh, I'll just blame it on the other. I'll blame it on the others. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what you just said.
Yeah, so he has some moments of weakness there where perhaps he's blaming it on others, but other times it seems to be really sincere, as Michael, you're talking about, of a way to say, hey, look, these are the mistakes that were made. Let's learn from them so that when you go into the promised land, you can be that much stronger because of the mistakes you made before.
I think he's trying to offer his best advice, which can, in a very highly, there's so much emotion and so many people are remembering so many things because among the many people who are listening, some of them did things really well and some of them did them really poorly. So what are the lessons that have been learned? I could see his desire to say, look at my life, learn from it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of humility in that. That's not an easy thing to do, right?
No, he's pointing out things that he did wrong also.
Yeah.
When God was mad at him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a hard oration to give in front of the entire Israelite people, right? Let's look at a couple more of these commentaries. So Devarim Rabbah, or Deuteronomy Rabbah, says Moses, the friend of Israel, rebuked the people, while Balaam, Israel's enemy, blessed them. Thus, the authenticity of both was beyond question. Which I thought was really kind of an interesting commentary, right? So, Michael, you talked about absolute sincerity, right? It is not in Moses's nature to rebuke the people. So, when he feels the need to rebuke the people, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's doing it for a sincere, for a bigger purpose, right? Just like Balaam, it's not in his energy to bless the people. So when he did, how much more powerful was that blessing? It's kind of a cool way of looking at it, I think. So M. Cohen gives another commentary that Moses began reproving the people by offering a blessing in order to make his reproof more palatable. That if we kind of go up to the top, sorry if this is making anyone dizzy, but where is it? I mean, he is saying some positive things to the people about their ability to go into the land, about being numerous and so on. And what he's saying is by putting those things first, it means the rebuke will be heard. Generally speaking, if we go up to someone and just say, these are all the ways in which you've made mistakes, that's not going to be particularly helpful for anyone, right? But if it's in the greater context of something, perhaps it really can be heard and understood and start a good conversation. So I think that's part of what's going on here. Let's look at this first, right? So he includes this blessing here. May Adonai, and here it's Adonai Elohe as well. Sandy, so you see that keeps repeating throughout the text. May Adonai, the God of your ancestors, increase your numbers 1,000-fold and bless you as promised. How can I bear the burden, unaided the trouble of you and the burden and the bickering? This idea of blessing and also maybe a little bit of frustration, maybe humility, maybe lots of different things, depending on how we read that. Stop bickering so much, people. That kind of a thing. Any thoughts on that before I move on? I just can't see everyone. Okay. So then let's move to this next text, also from this week's commentary that we read. Does anyone want to read this one aloud?
I can do it.
Thank you so much, Ray.
The Rabbi Judy Shanks one?
Yes, please.
Okay. Moses could have begun his great orations with chastisement and heaped scorn upon the children of those who repeatedly provoked his anger and resentment. Such a decision would have come from a pure giverah, fueled solely by Moses' ego-driven desire to exonerate himself of guilt and responsibility. Such an approach would have surely alienated many who listened, whether from familial loyalty to their forebears or simply from resentment at his harsh tone. As he composes in the whole of the book of Deuteronomy what becomes his ethical will, Moses must again and again consider how each word will be taken and remembered collectively and individually by the Israelites and the generations to come.
So it kind of speaks to what we were talking about before, and thank you so much, Ray, for reading, that we see this real thoughtfulness and kind of balance in the words that Moses is using, right? It never gets too sharp. It also doesn't become too fluffy. Like there really is this thoughtfulness with what Moses is going to respect in his final words. Did someone have something to say? I thought I heard someone.
I think this focuses that you have to balance. Not everybody hears everything the same way. That's a really good point to be putting in there. So yeah, you would modify your message in as many ways as you can, with as many stories as you can. I love the ethical will.
Yeah, and that's another point. So my drush for tomorrow morning, we'll be talking to that, and I'm actually putting together a 3-week course that'll be offered during the month of Elul on ethical will. So I can talk a little bit more about that. But essentially, Deuteronomy is Moses's ethical will. That is his kind of passing on of his values and his stories to future generations. Something very powerful about that. It's amazing that we've only been studying one chapter, right? I'm going to the end of this first chapter, but it's all just one chapter of Deuteronomy. How much stuff has already been covered within it. So it says, Joshua, son of Nun, who attends you, he shall enter it, meaning Joshua is going to be leading the people into the land of Israel. If we remember who Joshua was and the story of the scouts, right? 12 spies, 12 scouts were sent into the land of Israel. 10 of them say, oh no, there's giants there. We can't possibly enter. We should go back to Egypt, all this kind of stuff. And there are 2 who say, no, let's go into the land of Israel. We absolutely can. God's on our side. And those 2 are Caleb and also Joshua. And Joshua will become the next leader to bring the people into the promised land. So Joshua, son of Nun, who attends to you, he shall enter it. Imbue him with strength, for he shall allot it to Israel. Moreover, your little ones, who you said would be carried off, your children who do not yet know good from bad, they shall enter it. To them will I give it, and they shall possess it. What do you pick up from this verse? From these verses, actually?
What's called a tabla rasa, a clean slate, a new beginning.
So there's some hope and promise there.
Also, there's the children who are going to carry it on, not the adults. The adults have the responsibility to train and to educate the children, but they are not I mean, this is going to go on for many, many generations.
And I think you said a really, really important word in that, Rabbi Catherine, because the word responsibility, right? Here is Moses, who has taken on so much responsibility for the past 40 years, and not just him, also Aaron, also Miriam, also lots of other leaders within the community, but that generation is no more, right? And so now there's a passing on and saying, here, take this responsibility. You have promise ahead of yourself. Pass this on. You can do it. I'm giving you tools. You can use them. Trust yourself. You have Joshua. Give him strength, for he shall allot it back to you, right? He's someone who you can trust. Something really beautiful about that.
Hi.
Does anyone want to read this next text here from Rabbi Judy Shanks?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Thanks, Larry.
As he reaches his final days, Moses both exploits and contains his undiminished gevurah. He implicitly accepts God's decree that Joshua will take the mantle of leadership and lead the Israelites into the land. It takes eternal strength, fearlessness, and a reining in of the ego to offer unvarnished accounts of moments of his own weakness and failures of leadership. With his words and his silence, Moses seems to forgive himself for his mistakes, while simultaneously extending forgiveness and chesed to those standing before him who have stumbled before and will surely stumble again. He cautions the Israelites against the potential danger to the leader and to the community of endowing a single person with authority. He reminds them to appoint and maintain phalanxes of wise and discerning people as impartial judges, bringing peaceful resolution to conflict, Deuteronomy 1:13-18, and to share the burden of governance. In Jewish mysticism, Gevurah balances out the soul trait of chesed, loving kindness, as shown below.
So we'll look at that in just a second. Thank you so much, Larry. I just thought that the way that Rabbi Shanks wrote this out was so beautifully put, right? Of the struggle that we see within themselves. Yeah, Michael, please.
Well, I just think that maybe one of the most important things that she wrote is the reining in of ego, which is a problem that, speaking for myself and others, human beings have, and it's probably very difficult for leaders to rein in their ego because of the position they have. But Moses was a very special person, and he could do this, and that's what's that one is one of the most important things I'm reading from this passage.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing quite as humbling as being confronted with one's mortality,
Right.
right? Like that's what's happening to Moses here. He knows that he has days left. And he was a great leader who everyone looked up to. But now it's not about him, it's about the people. Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Anyone else have any responses or thoughts about this passage?
I like this Rabbi Judy Shanks, and I think it's her being female lends itself to that announcement about ego. I mean, I'm just supposing that women in general are subject to strong men and leading all the time in their lives, find that ego situation difficult. But I'd like to hear more from this rabbi. I like her.
I'm glad this speaks to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anyone I'm missing? I hate that I can only see like 4 people at a time. So
It's very interesting. I'm looking at with his words in his silence, Moses seems to forgive himself for his mistakes, while simultaneously extending forgiveness and chesed to those standing by him who have also, that doesn't say also, stumbled before and will surely stumble again. I mean, if the greatest of our leaders can do that, I mean, and you're looking at, I know everybody does this, is you beat yourself up. I do that a lot. And it's not good. And it's not a good example to myself or to anyone else who is around me. So that's a very interesting combination of things that he manages, in Rabbi Shank's opinion, to demonstrate. Yeah, I made a whole lot of mistakes, but I did the best I could and I learned from them.
and along those same lines, it's so important what you're bringing up, Rabbi Catherine. There are final prayers that Jews can say at the very end of their lives, right?
Yes.
And we all say the same basic final prayers, and they have a couple of different components to it. One component is admitting I've made mistakes,
Right.
asking for forgiveness, both from oneself and also for the people around, wishing, good things for the family they leave behind, right? And also having a moment of connection to something bigger than ourselves. And I see some of those same themes in exactly this, that there is this understanding that every single one of us is a human being. None of us are perfect. Not even Moses was perfect, right? And to be able to acknowledge, okay, we're all human beings. We make mistakes. There are things that are much more important than the mistakes that we make. Our relationships, right? And if we can forgive ourselves and those around us, if we can connect to something bigger than ourselves and serve the greater community through our actions and our interactions with others, how much better is the world for that? So there's a lot of power, I think, in exactly that. And every time I've done those blessings, it has been a powerful experience for families and for individuals. So let's look at this. And this will also go back to, Sandy, what you were talking about, right, with the Adonai and the Elohinu, that in Jewish mysticism, there is this idea of a balance between Givurah. Another name for Givurah is Din. So those two are interchangeable in mystical circles. And Chesed, loving kindness. So the way it works is, I know this is all in Hebrew, and there's a little bit of English in there too, so you can see. But all of these 10 Sephirot, these are supposed to be the aspects of the likeness of God. Okay, so it's different characteristics that we can hope to exemplify. And Keter, that's the most lofty of them. It's the crown, right? Shekhinah, that is kind of God's presence here on earth. But there's other traits that kind of balance each other as well. But the one that we're looking at in particular is this idea of Givurah, which is rigor, judgment, strength. That's on one side. And Chesed, loving kindness and grace and love, that's on the other side. And if we have too much Chesed, as we've talked about before, like if we go too far to the extreme, then we can be so giving of ourselves that we actually aren't doing what we need to take care of ourselves. And we're also not holding ourselves and other people accountable for their actions. Like you can go too far in one direction and it's not healthy. If we go too far in Givurah, as we talked about, right? We can be so incredibly rigid that we lose sight of what's most important. We lose sight of relationships, and we block ourselves up from creativity and so many other wonderful parts of life. But the hope is to actually find a balance between these, to live with both Chesed and Gevurah, with discipline that propels us forward, but also loving kindness that allows us to focus on our values of being there for others. Okay, I have just a couple of more texts that I'd like to bring in. Does anyone want to read this text by David Eber?
I can do it.
Thank you so much, Irv.
To be loving, to be ascetic.
A Hasidic, yeah.
Ascetic person requires great discipline. To love someone doesn't mean just loving when it's easy, often especially those close to us, our children, our partners, our friend. It can be extremely difficult to always respond with loving kindness. When those we love don't live up to our expectations or they anger us, it's precisely because we love them and it can be hard to remain objective and calm.
Does anyone relate to this? Does this speak to you?
It's a good sports metaphor here. You got a team in the cellar, but you still love them. You got to keep rooting, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And what I love about this quote from David Eber also is if we're looking at this chart right here, looking at it, we might say, okay, there's chesed on this hand and there's Givurah on this hand, and we need a balance that is in between the two. But what this quote is showing is that actually they can lend each other help, right? To have a true loving relationship is to have discipline in our relationship. To have discipline in our lives is to bring in love. Our strongest relationships aren't ones that run away from problems. They're ones that enable us to live as our best selves while also keeping an open mind. And that can be a really difficult thing to do, but it has such an incredible reward.
I want to share something personal.
Yeah.
My wife has early Alzheimer's. That requires incredible loving kindness. Requires a different way of talking. She can't handle responsibility. So it takes incredible strength to say it's my fault when it isn't, because loving kindness demands that. So that's a balance that changes depending on the physical and mental health of those you're caring for. Hesed has to overbalance the strength because the other person doesn't have it.
That's such a powerful example, Larry. Thank you so much for sharing that with all of us.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes our love and kindness truly requires discipline in order to live up to the love and kindness that we want to display to the people who matter the most to us.
Right. It's a different way of looking at it, which I'm still learning. I had to leave the room because I couldn't talk about that with her present.
Yeah, and you're not alone in that. There's many, many people who are struggling with exactly that and finding ways to really help the people that we love.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or things that anyone wants to bring in here? Sometimes it could also just be helpful to think it through on our own without verbalizing it out loud, and that's fine as well.
Thank you for that, Larry.
You're welcome, Irv. You're welcome. Thank you for being here. It gives me great solace.
One of the things that's beauty about Torah study also is how real all of this really is, right? And how it can speak to us on really deep and personal ways. And we can support one another through all of that. So,
Right.
I was going to say that the second sentence, especially it said with those closest to us, our children, our partners, and our friends, it can be extremely difficult to always respond with loving kindness. So, to me, it's probably, it's an ongoing process, but I had to force myself to realize that my child has a different personality, a different soul, and is different from both Sandy and myself, rather than a conglomeration of the two of us. And to, even though in his particular lifetime, there have been a number of instances that were very, very trying for us. This statement, it is extremely difficult to always respond with loving kindness, with relating to children and how they live their lives and the choices that they make.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. Yeah, to be able to learn how to really honor and respect and show love when we don't understand what someone we love is really doing.
And we can't relate to it necessarily because it's so different from what we think is normal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if we read that back into the story here too, because there is this generational difference between Moses and the generations to follow. I wonder if there are things there where Moses is kind of stepping back and saying, I don't necessarily get what they're doing, but I'm putting my faith in them and showing them loving kindness, and that might be yet another element that's in the mix here. So I want to end with this final text, and then I'll bring down this text sheet, where Rabbi Judy Shanks ends with this. Biblically, Moses's final great gift of leadership is to teach us how to live our last days with Givorah. Our final great task is meeting death. Rabbi Mark Margolis writes, a midah is not an action. It represents a pool of sacred energy we identify with within ourselves as a quality available to generate action, mitzvah, fostering greater holiness or wholeness in this world. Moses's final journey with his people requires him to access and explore his internal pool of strength and make it accessible to every Israelite, who will, he prays, use it to bring holiness into the world that he's leaving behind. So this idea that all of us, we have an ability to make a difference in our lifetimes and to pass on what we learn, to pass on our wisdom, to pass on the Torah within ourselves to future generations so that they can take it just a little bit further. There's a lot of humility in that. And there's also just a lot of strength, a lot of Gevurah. So we explored a lot of really personal and I think some challenging stuff in this week's Torah portion. Any final thoughts or questions that anyone has?
In the Musar Torah commentary, the question they ask says, ask yourself, which strengths do I possess that allow me to bring goodness into my world and to inspire others to do the same? I think we should all take a look at that. We're all of an age, most of us, and what example are we setting for our family, our children, and our extended family, and the community?
That's a beautiful question and takeaway for all of us, right? What are the ways in which we can use Gevurah to bring loving kindness to our world and to future generations? And if we can leave with that in our heart and reflect on it, I think that's a beautiful way to end. Yeah, Irv, sorry, go ahead.
Just when I was fundraising at our temple in Orange County, I met a gentleman, and he says, when I'm making out my budget, I have a line item for tzedakah. So and he says and that's just built into his life. And I said, well, what an example. There's still times when you don't feel like giving. But that lasted ever since I met him.
Beautiful. There's so many ways in which we can set that example and have discipline. Thank you. Thank you all so much for exploring all of this so beautifully with your questions, with your insights, with your own personal stories. I'm so grateful to be able to study with all of you. I missed it. I missed being with you. You might notice if you went into Safaria, I've actually created text sheets all the way through Rosh Hashanah, just to have them all done. So if anyone wanted to peek ahead at some of the things we'll be doing, you're welcome to do that. But I look forward to being with you next week, next Thursday, as we explore the next one. And tomorrow night, we'll be doing our beach Shabbat with a few other communities, which will be lovely. And I hope to see you there as well if you're able to. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.